event right now. And then please be rest assured that the event will be recorded. So again, good morning, everybody. You are highly welcome to this event. And it is morning in Nigeria, but to those from other side of the world, it's not yet. We say hello, everybody. So this morning, today we shall be looking at what is called literature review, and we have our speaker here with us, Engineer Jibril Bala. He will be taking us through the bolts and nuts of literature review. So without wasting much time, let me invite Engineer Bala to take the floor and share with us over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Aibinu. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's a privilege being with you here today. So kindly permit me to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Thank you very much. So it's an honor and privilege being with you here today. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to the Vice Chancellor of Summit University, Professor Abiodun Musa Aibinu, for giving me the opportunity to join you, and also for organizing an event of this magnitude. A lot of us who have gone through the academic system will understand the importance of this hybrid seminar series, primarily because it gives you an in-depth understanding of what is expected from you as regards to a literature review. And this is not something you would obtain in almost everywhere, because nobody would hold your hand and guide you through the in-depth processes of literature reviews, especially at tertiary level. Your supervisors would only guide you. So it's very important, this event as well, and it's very, should I say, rare to have an event of this magnitude. So I want to thank the management of Summit University for organizing this program. So a little bit about myself. I'm mostly a name without a face. My name is Jibril, and I am a faculty member of the Department of Mechatronics Engineering, Federal University of Technology, and also a visiting scholar at Summit University, Offa. And I'll be introducing you today to the fundamentals of a literature review, so that we can have an understanding of what is expected from us in a literature review, how do we conduct the review, and why should we even do it? Why should we bother? So on our screen, we should see the presentation outline, where we'll look at what the literature review is, why we do it, where should we do it, and how do we do it. Then we'd also look at the benefits of the literature review, some pitfalls to avoid, common mistakes that people make during the review, and also a final checklist to guide us through our review journey. Excuse me. So research itself mainly involves identifying a problem and providing a solution to that problem. That's majorly the reason why people carry out research. So when you hear research, that is basically what it encompasses. You identify a problem and you provide a solution to that problem. Now, when providing that solution, it can be a new solution, or you could improve on an existing solution, because it's very possible that any solution that you think of has already been implemented by somebody else. So what you can do is to improve upon that solution. That's if you're not developing a novel solution. But if you're improving upon a solution, or you are designing a new solution, you need to know what is already obtainable in the world. You need to know what is the status quo at that moment. if you identify a problem such as movement of people from one point to another, and you say the solution you want to invent is a car, there are a million cars around. So you need to know the state of research in that particular area, and you need to know how you can contribute. And if there is no existing research in that area, then fine, you can develop something new. But if there is existing research, then you need to improve upon that research. And literature review itself gives you a great starting point in any research you want to carry out. And it gives you a direction regarding the research that you want to do. And that is why it is important for us to understand what it is and understand how to do it and why we should do it. And as we'll see later on, it applies to different areas of our lives, not just academics, but also people in the industry, people in business, people in government also need to know how to carry out a good literature review. Because whatever you want to do, as I said, research involves identifying a problem and providing a solution. As long as you are providing a solution to a problem, you need to know the status quo. So what is this literature review that we keep talking about? Well, basically, what a literature review is you look at information in a particular area that has been published either online or in books, and you analyze that information, you understand that information, and from that information, you get an understanding of that topic, of that subject area, and you also identify what has been done in that area and how you can contribute in that area. And a literature review can provide both theoretical background, and it can also provide a review of existing works in literature. It is primarily important because before you undertake a research in any particular area, you need to have a proper understanding of that area. Not just the work that has been done, but also the theoretical background and the basis. Going back to our transportation problem, if you want to develop a car, you cannot build a car or improve on existing designs of a car without understanding the background of developing a car. So literature review is very, very important when it comes to your research journey. Now, this review itself can take many forms. It can either be a self-contained unit on its own. You have a lot of journal papers, conference papers that are categorized as review papers. And in those review papers, the entire paper itself forms a sort of literature review as a self-contained unit, as a standalone unit that you can read and understand it as a literature review without requiring additional elements to it. But another way that a review can be structured is that it can be a precursor to the research you are doing. So the literature reviews we see in our projects, the literature reviews we see in our dissertations, those types of reviews are not standalone per se, because they provide a rationale, a reason, a justification why you should carry out a research. So those are the two major formats in which a literature review can be organized. And you would hear many names associated with literature review. It can be also called a literature survey. It can be called a literature search. Some people use state of the art, especially for those of us in the IT and engineering fields. So there are many terms that are used interchangeably when it comes to literature review. And it is very important because it is required in grant proposals. If you're writing a proposal for a grant, you need to justify why you want to carry out that research, why you should be given the money for funding in the first place. And if you don't carry out a literature review to tell the organizing body that, okay, this is what is obtainable currently, this is what I want to do, and this is why you should give me your money, it doesn't, they won't even listen to you because they need a relevant justification. It is required as part of research proposals. If you want to carry out a research project on your own, you can't just wake up one morning and say, okay, I want to do research in this area. No, you have to look at the area, look at what is existing in that area, then see how you can contribute to that area, because research mainly involves contribution to knowledge. And if there are a lot of research in that area and you're just repeating what people have done, then it's not really a contribution. It's also required in papers, journals, conferences, book chapters. When you are developing a paper and you are telling people, this is my major contribution, you have to give a justification for that contribution. You have to tell them, this is why I'm contributing, this is what is existing in literature, this is the limitation of what is in literature, and this is where I come in. And it's also required as part of your thesis and dissertations. Most of the times our undergraduate and postgraduate projects requires a chapter on its own for literature review, where you provide the theoretical background and basic concepts, and you also review existing work in that area. So you can see that in academics per se, in almost all aspects, a literature review is important. But we will see later on that it's also relevant in other aspects outside academics. Now, you have good literature reviews and you have bad literature reviews. And it's important for you to know the difference, especially when it comes to you developing yours, because you do not want your own literature review to fall under the bad category. You always want it to be good. And that would provide a justification for your thesis. It will provide the editors or reviewers in any journal or conference you submit to a rationale for accepting your paper and publishing it. Now, first of all, a literature review is a synthesis of available research. What that means is you are looking at different researches, you are analyzing them, you are evaluating them critically, you are looking at the strengths and the weaknesses, you are comparing them against each other. But a bad literature review is just what we call an annotated bibliography. What it means is you pick this paper, you just describe the work that is done, you move to the next paper, you describe that work, you move to the next paper, you describe that work. That is an annotated bibliography, and that's not really a good literature review. A good literature review is a critical evaluation. So if you have a paper that talks about the design of a car, in a good literature review, you talk about the method that was used in designing the car, the strengths of that car, the limitations of that car, why you feel the car is suffering from those limitations, and what you feel can be done to improve those limitations. That's a critical evaluation. But a description would just be, okay, the car was built with this, it contains that, it is this color. A bad literature review is mostly a description. You want your literature review to be a critical evaluation. Your literature review should have breadth and depth. What that means is, if you pick a subject area and you are looking at it, you want to evaluate most areas a lot. You want it to be broad. You want to evaluate a lot of areas in that particular field to justify why you want to do the research. You cannot allow your literature review to be narrow and shallow. And what that means is you just pick a particular part to talk about so that it will just justify the work you are doing. You have to look at it broadly so that you can understand properly what has been done in that field. It needs to be clear and concise. It shouldn't be confusing, and you shouldn't beat around the bush. And also you need to use rigorous and consistent methods that are obtainable in literature. Not you don't just do the literature review anyhow. You have to follow particular steps, as we would see later on. So that's what a literature review is. But why do we do it? Why do we even bother ourselves looking at what people have done? Well, the main purpose is to analyze what has been published, and you compare prior researches that have been done in that area. You can take a critical look at what has been done, and it gives you a direction for where you are heading to in terms of your research. You're not just making a list, or like we have in the slide, a shopping list. You're not just making a list of the research that has been done, but you're actually looking at it critically, evaluating the research, looking at the strengths, looking at the weaknesses, what makes it good, what makes it not so good, and trying to see where you can play a role and where you can fit in. And as I said earlier, irrespective of the idea you have, no matter how good you feel your idea is, when you go online and you search at research papers, conferences, journals, it is very likely that you will see that somebody has thought of that idea, somebody has worked in that area, and somebody has carried out experiments even more than what you want to do and has published in that area. So if you continue along that line without doing a research, then you're going to duplicate the work. You're going to waste time, energy, and resources. If you're doing a degree, you're going to waste months of your life working on a project that has already been done. Only when you go to publish or you go to a defense and they'll tell you, and what are you introducing that is new? You're going to introduce money and resources, your time, your energy, laboratory equipment, money for internet and data to do research that has already been done. So you need to do the review properly to know where are the research gaps that you are going to fill. And that literature review will demonstrate why your research is relevant, and it will be able to convince anybody you are presenting to that this is worth doing. So from the slide here, we can see the main purposes of literature review, distinguishing what has been done from what needs to be done. You need to differentiate what has been done previously from what you have to do to fill those research gaps. You need to discover important concepts relevant to the topic. You need to gain a new perspective, identify relationships between theory and practical, and establish the context of the problem. You need to properly identify the problem that you're trying to solve in the scope of the research gaps that you've identified. Now, where do we conduct the literature review? We know what it is, we know why we do it, but where do we do it? Well, some of the most common places that literature review is carried out are journal and conference papers. If you're writing a paper, you have to justify. In most papers, you will see that there is a section itself on literature review, but some papers embed their own literature review as part of the introduction. It's all the same, it's all a literature review. Then if you're writing books, maybe a book chapter, or you're contributing to a scientific book or manuscript, you have to conduct the literature review to justify your own contribution. And of course, our projects, our theses, and our dissertations. But other places that we also apply literature review is you apply it to grant and research proposals. If you're trying to obtain funding from an agency, you're trying to get a grant from them, you have to carry out a review to justify the research you're carrying out. You have to carry out a review to justify why they should give you their money, why they should entrust you with a large amount of money to carry out that research. You also need to do the literature review when you are doing technical and progress reports. If you are reporting to an agency, maybe a government agency, a non-governmental agency, you need to carry out the literature review so that you can justify some of the results you've obtained or some of the methods you decided to carry out. And when developing curriculum for our schools, even from nursery, primary to secondary level, up to tertiary level, you need to carry out a literature review. Look at what is existing currently, the state of the art, so that any curriculum you are introducing needs to adopt those recent technologies, and so that your curriculum will not be obsolete. You need to do the literature review in research projects before you embark on any research project on your own. And even businesses, if you want to start a business, you need to carry out a literature review. Although in the business world, they more or less call it a market analysis or feasibility studies, but it's more or less a literature review, because you have to look at what is existing currently in the area. You have to look at how your product will affect the community you are in. And it just goes beyond asking people on the street, what is this, what is that? But you also need to do research. You need to look at literature and works to provide a justification for your business. Maybe many people have implemented the same business and it has failed. You have to look at, okay, why did it fail? How can my own not fail? How can it be better? How can I improve? And even in government as well, you need to carry out a literature review. A lot of our government policies and laws, some of the committees they form, you will always see them bringing in people from the academics, professors, you see people from industry, people from the host community, you know. They bring these people together so that they can provide insight to what policies and how it will solve people's problem. And they cannot do that without doing a literature review. They need to know what is obtainable currently so that they can recommend what would be helpful to the society. So there are many aspects, many areas in our life where we need to conduct literature review. Even for those of us that are family members or students, before you go to the market and you buy your foodstuff, you need to carry out a literature review. You need to ask your friends, where did you get this? How good is it? How cheap is it? It's also a form of literature review. So anything you want to do, basically you need to carry out a form of literature review or survey. Now, but before you carry out that review, what do you need to do, especially in the academic context? One of the first things you need to do is you need to be clear on what you are going to do. You need to be clear on your assignment. You need to be clear on your topic. You need to be clear on the project you want to carry out. If you are not clear, especially those of us doing undergraduate, postgraduate projects, you need clarification from your supervisor or lecturer. And for those doing postgraduate studies, one of the major problems we face is finding a suitable problem to work on, because it takes months of literature review, extensive literature review. That's to show the importance. You need clarity so that even when sourcing for the literature that you're going to review, you would have a sense of direction. Then also you should have in mind, okay, roughly how many sources should you include? Depending on your level, either undergraduate, master's, PhD, OND, HND, postgraduate diploma, there are, let me say, like de facto rule of thumbs on at least how many sources should you include. If reviewing 50 papers is okay for undergraduates, it might not be okay for PhD. You know, and maybe reviewing 200 papers might be okay for PhD, but for undergraduate, it might be too much. So you have to understand how many sources do you intend to review. Then also, if you're developing a journal or conference paper, for instance, some of these papers have page limitations. Maybe they don't want your article to be more than 10 pages. If you're limiting your paper to 10 pages, you cannot review 50 articles because it will take up basically everything and you might even need more. So in those kind of situations, you have to understand the limitations of how many sources. Then what kind of sources are you reviewing? Are you reviewing books? Are you reviewing journal articles? Are you reviewing websites? If you're doing a literature review for a governmental organization, they will be more interested in the statistics, in the impact, and the outcome than they are in the methods. So in that kind of situation, you have to look at what sources of the literature review you are going to pick. Like in some postgraduate programs, they prefer most of your reviews to come from journals than conferences. So those kind of things, you need to take note of them before you proceed. Are you still with me? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay, thank you. Then, in addition, what you need to do to clarify what you should do before the review is, are you going to summarize, evaluate, or critique your sources? Like I said, a literature review needs to do critical evaluation, but there are some instances where critical evaluation is not really desired. There are some instances where mostly what they want is historical analysis. Some just want the statistical data. So you need to understand the requirements for your review so that you wouldn't go and evaluate in depth while what they are looking for mostly are numbers. So you need to have clarity in that. And how are you organizing the literature review? Are you providing subheadings and other background information? Like if you are developing journal or conference papers, most at times they want minimal theoretical background in that area. They mostly want to see your introduction, the research gaps you identified, the methods and the results. But if you are doing an undergraduate or postgraduate project, they would want you to provide theoretical background of the area which you are working on. So you have to know the context in which you are doing the review. Then also before the review, you need to find models. What I mean here is, if you are developing a review, either for your research project in school, or a conference or journal paper that's a review paper, or a literature review within a research paper, you have to look for models like samples of how other people implemented their own reviews in that area so that you can follow suit. I'm not saying pick a sample and copy. I'm saying look at different samples and look at how they structured the review so that you would know how to organize your own review in a particular context. If you are developing a review paper, you cannot do your literature review as if you are writing a literature review in a section of a small paper. You have to, blow it up and make it more in-depth. So you have to look at models to know how to base yours on. You could just search online. After putting the topic, you can put review or survey in front, and you can come up with different review papers in that area that can help with. Then also, if you have a paper that you've read, if you go through the references, you would see that there are a lot of papers in the references that are relevant to what they've done. So you can use that as a stepping off point to search for yours. Then you also have to focus and narrow your topic. Now, what I mean here is, if you are working on a particular research project, you cannot be generic, you cannot be broad. You have to narrow down particularly to whatever specific area you are working on. When I was starting my PhD, my supervisors were always saying, narrow down, narrow down, narrow down. When I write a problem, they will always emphasize, narrow down, narrow down. You have to be specific. There are thousands of articles in your area of study. If you do not narrow down, it's going to be very difficult for you to identify the literature you're trying to find. And you would have to limit the number of literature you want to read. So you need to identify a specific topic. If you are working in agriculture and you are working on plants, you have to narrow down to the specific type of plant. Even in the plant, you have to narrow down to the variety. If you are developing an engineering solution, let's say for the, let's say you are working on, let's say, poultry feeding, for instance, you have to narrow down to the particular type of bed you are considering. So you have to limit, the scope of your study so that it helps you with the review. Because your supervisor doesn't expect you to read everything, so it will make it much easier for you if you narrow down your topic. If you just go and say you want to develop an automatic fruit picker, what kind of fruit are you considering? What kind of farm are you considering? Are you considering trees, or are you considering just shrubs and your regular crops? You have to be very specific to make your work easier. One important thing also in literature review is you have to make sure that your sources are current. For those of us, particularly in sciences, engineering, IT, physical and life sciences, it's very important that your techniques are as recent as possible. In engineering, it's a common rule of thumb to say your review shouldn't be more than 5 years old. But in medical sciences, for instance, even 2 years might be too late, because in 2 years, a lot would have happened, right? Remember when we went through COVID-19? Normally, they say vaccine development takes a year or 2 years at the minimum. But because of the dire situation in the COVID era, within less than a year, we had many vaccines that were produced. So you see, in that kind of setting or research environment, 2 years, a lot can happen. But if you're looking at areas such as social sciences and history, sometimes you might need those old reviews, because maybe they want to see a historical trend or how things improved over time. So you have to consider also the context before you carry out the review. Then, going through, this takes us back to finding a model. Going through existing work, seeing what they did in your area would help you get a sense of what you're supposed to do. Now, how do we conduct the review? We've covered now what we should do before. How should we do it? Our literature review covers these major steps. You need to find the literature, then you need to manage the literature, then you use the literature, then you review the literature, and you can see the different steps under that, but we'll look at them in depth. Now, the whole literature review process, number one, involves searching for the literature, sorting and prioritizing which one do I want to use, which one is more important, which one is not that important, analytical reading, evaluative reading, comparison of different studies, organization of the content, and then you conclude by writing the review. So you see that when it comes to writing a literature review, in the steps of doing the review, writing the review is actually last. That's the last thing you are going to do. You have to carry out all these preliminary steps before you get to writing the review. So let's look at them one after the other. When it comes to searching for literature, you have to, treat this, of course, in the next session tomorrow, but I'll just give you an overview here of what you need to do when searching for literature. You need to get sources that can be authenticated. What I mean by authenticated is you cannot just go to a website that is unreliable and say you want to get a literature review from there. No. Especially in academics, in the industry, in professional settings, you cannot carry literature review from, let's say, blogs, or what people just think in their head and post online. You cannot just go to Twitter and carry somebody's tweet and use it as a literature review. No. You have to carry relevant and authenticated sources, such as journal articles, books and book chapters, conference proceedings. You can do a literature review from websites. There are websites that publish academic and technical information. You can get your review from there. The whole idea is, at the end of the day, if somebody goes through your work and checks your references and decides to trace that literature that you've cited, they should be able to find it. If you go and carry somebody's Facebook post and use it as literature review, and the person deletes it tomorrow, what would happen? Nobody can authenticate it. And there are many instances, especially those of us in undergraduate, that will just come across something online and use it in our work. And when our lecturer asks us, where did you find it? I want to see it. You can't find it again. So those kind of sources, you cannot use those as literature reviews. You have to use authenticated sources. Then after that, you need to prioritize and sort. Mostly in academics, we have what is called base papers. Those are the papers that will serve as a basis for your work. So those ones carry high priority, but you can also organize your review chronologically. You can organize it according to year. Maybe you have a folder for 2022, another one for 2021, and so on. You can organize it by publication. Maybe you can organize your literature from highly rated journals and then from other non-highly rated journals, so that you can prioritize which one to search from. Because mostly reviewing from highly rated journals gives more credibility to your work. You can also organize it by trend. If you are working on, let's say, a robot perception, a lot of people have used sensors, but a lot of people have also used cameras. So you can organize your review as, you have those who have used sensors and you have those who have used cameras. Then you can also organize it by theme. What is it talking about? Is it more related to machine learning, or is it related to optimization or things like that? You can organize it by methodology, and you can organize it by the open areas. Which literature recommends these challenges or these research gaps to be worked on in the future? Then also you need to keep track of your literature, and one easy way to do that is to use a reference manager like Mendeley or EndNote. Keeping track of the literature you have manually can be a very daunting process. It's very easy for you to lose track of literature. So with these reference managers, it's very simple to keep track of the literature. Then you need to analytically read the literature. You need to understand the theoretical and practical issues. You need to obtain background information and understand the topic that it's talking about, and understand why your own work is relevant to be researched. When you pick up an article or a paper and you're trying to use it as a literature review, you need to understand what the article is talking about and need to find how it's relevant to your work before you even start evaluating. If you are working on, let's say, finding antibacterial properties of a particular plant, and you go and carry a literature that talks about, let's say, I don't know, you're working on antibacteria, and you go and carry a literature that's talking about antiviral properties. In that kind of situation, it might not necessarily be related to the work you are trying to do. So you have to make sure that any paper you pick is relevant to your work before you go in depth. Then after you analyze the paper, you have to evaluate. You have to look at the findings and statistics. You have to understand their own theory, their background, and why they interpreted their results in that way. You have to understand what methods they took as well. Then you also highlight the opinions and point of view. You have to highlight what their conclusions were. Then you also have to make your own opinion about the paper. I'm not talking now about having a biased opinion, or maybe if you look at the author's name and the author has the same name as somebody you don't like and you say, I don't like this paper. No, you have to look at the work that has been done and make an opinion regarding that work. Do you feel the work is good enough? If it's not, how can you improve on the work? Then you have to compare the various literatures. You have to compare across studies. So you might look for similarities and differences in the aims, in the methodology and design, what instruments were used, how the data was analyzed, the results and findings and interpretations. And why this helps you primarily is because if you are working on a particular topic and you have results, you need to compare your results with existing literature to show that, okay, your results are better than what is obtainable in literature. But if the trend is to analyze the performance in terms of, let's say, root mean square error, and you go and analyze your own performance in terms of accuracy and precision, you have no basis for comparison. So you have to understand the trend across the topics, how they carried out their own research, so that your research also can follow a similar trend and form a basis for comparing and showing that, okay, your own is better, or in some cases not better. And then you have to organize the content. It's very important. The organization of your literature review is very, very vital, because anybody that picks it up and wants to read, if it's not organized properly, they really lose interest in work that has not been organized well. So just like any writing, you have three basic elements of the literature review. You have the introduction, then you have the body, and you have the conclusion, right? And you can organize this in form of both global and local levels. Now, what I mean by global and local levels is, if you're organizing it at a local level, it means that your literature review is within a particular article. So like the literature review we do in our projects, the literature review we do in journal and conference papers, it's within the article. It serves as a precursor to our research, and that is an organization at a local scale. But if you look at global scale, it means the entire paper you are developing is a literature review paper. So you have to organize it in that manner as well. The levels of organizations are different, and we'll look at them briefly. But before then, the introduction primarily should provide the reader with what your review is talking about. It should give the reader a basic preamble to what they are going to get themselves into, and it serves as a map for them to navigate the review. Now, it's in the body that you do the critical evaluation and not just describe the work that has been done. You have to evaluate it critically. Look for similarities, differences, look for strengths and limitations, look for open areas, and all that. Then in the conclusion, that's where you analyze the main findings of the literature review. What can you draw from this review? Now, if we look at local organization of content, what we have here is just a paragraph from a literature review chapter in a thesis. Now, if you look at the first part of the paragraph that's in purple color, it says in 32, an asphalt pavement pothole and crack detection system was developed using multispectral imagery on UAVs. Now that gives you an introduction to the statement. That's the introductory part. And then you have the next part, which says the technique presented spatial and spectral features of road anomalies and machine learning algorithms such as SVM, neural networks, and random forest. And they were used for classification between normal pavements and pavements with damages. Now that gives you the body. It talks about the methodology, and that serves as the body. Now the part in red also can form part of the methodology, where the results showed an accuracy of 98.3% in classification. But now the last part now forms the conclusion, where it now analyzes the work that was done and provides an in-depth understanding and, let's say, criticism of the work, where it says that spatial resolutions of the UAV was a major limitation of the UAV images, and this led to the system's inability to capture cracks less than 13.54 millimeter in width. So if you're organizing a literature review in a local context, it has to follow a similar format as this, where you introduce the reader to the work, you talk about what was done, you talk about the strengths, and you conclude by saying, okay, this is what I feel about it, these are the limitations. But what if you're organizing on a global scale? Now, on a global scale, then it means that you have to organize that literature review in sections or chapters. And the first section should be an introductory section that provides an overview of the entire work. And the second section, or the third and fourth and second sections, can divide the work into different categories, the review into different categories. So if you're analyzing, let's say, artificial intelligence, the first review section can look at optimization algorithms, the second review section can look at machine learning, and the third can look at deep learning or something. And then you should have a concluding section that talks about general observations, open areas that are future research directions and challenges currently, and also comparative statements that analyzes, okay, this review has more weight over this one, and this is the reason. Now we come to writing the review. If we are writing the review, what should we actually write in the review? The first thing you need to write is the accepted facts in that area. You cannot just give your own opinion on something that is different from the facts in that area. Everybody knows the sky is blue. You cannot go to a literature review and say the sky is red or is cyan. Then you should also write the popular opinion based on what the author presents. You need to identify the main parameters that the authors worked with, and you need to find a relationship between the theoretical background and the parameters that were used. Then you can also look for shortcomings in the existing work and the limitations. Then you also provide the relevance of your own research. Why do you feel your research will address those limitations? And also suggest future areas and future research areas in the review. Now, why should we do the literature review? What are the benefits? First of all, it will reveal that those topics that are researched are not researched. And mostly it's advisable to choose the topics that are not researched so that your work is a bit original. But even if it's researched, you can find a way to improve on the work by using a different method that you feel will give you better results. The literature review would also provide pitfalls and weaknesses and limitations of other studies. And once you identify those limitations, it means that, okay, your study is going to address those limitations. Then it will also identify the difficulties faced by other researchers. There are some works that will talk about the challenges faced in the research. And if they give a challenge, then you should do as much as possible to avoid those challenges so that you don't face the same problems they faced. Then the literature search will also reveal a better procedure of doing something. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If they recommend that this procedure would give you better results, it's advisable to carry it out, unless that's the procedure you're trying to change, that you're trying to introduce novelty. Then it will also review modern equipment, especially, if you're looking at international papers that are published recently, they will talk about the most recent equipment they've used. And for those of us in sciences, it can provide details of drugs, the doses, the number of test subjects, and even statistical methods for data analysis. And it can also provide information on your primary and secondary variables that you would need in the study. So these are benefits of the literature review and why they would help you. Now, some of the pitfalls you need to avoid when carrying out a literature review is vagueness. You cannot be unclear. You have to be specific. You have to be clear about what you're talking about. You cannot just say the work showed good performance. In what context does it show good performance? Is it in terms of the accuracy? Is it in terms of the speed? Is it in terms of the memory requirements? How is the performance good? So you cannot just use words like good without giving the context in which it was good. Then you cannot use inappropriate generalizations. Now, it's very common for us to look at a literature that we are trying to compare with our own work. And maybe if we're evaluating 3 parameters, accuracy, let's say accuracy, precision, and recall, and the literature that you're looking at has a lower accuracy than your own literature, but it has better or even the same precision and recall. Just because it has lower accuracy, you cannot just go ahead and say the accuracy was bad or the performance of the model was bad. No, you have to provide a context. You have to say, okay, in the context of accuracy, your own work performed better or this work performed better. However, in this context, this, that. You cannot just generalize and say something is good or bad without providing context. Then you should make sure that your literature does not have limited range. It has to be broad. Now, do not confuse this with narrowing down your topic. When you narrow down your topic, let's say you are looking at fruit, for instance, and you narrow down your topic to mango. Mango means you are narrowing down your topic to mango. You are looking at research on mango. However, when you're looking at literature around mango, you have to be as broad as possible. You have to consider different researches in the area of mango. Do not limit yourself to one area because that does not provide a sufficient review of literature. And you need to provide sufficient information. You cannot just hide information just because it doesn't suit you. If you are researching on mango, you cannot go and do a review of literature on banana. It's irrelevant. You have to review literature that is relevant to the area that you're looking at. Then also you need to provide a contrasting view. What that means is if one research says this technique is good, another research might say this technique is bad. Do not hesitate to bring in both into your literature review, showing both what one person says and a different review. Because in that kind of instance, they will give reasons for why they feel this is this, and from there you can make an analysis based on what they presented. And also try as much as possible to include recent work. If you are doing a review of literature that happened in 1997, we're in 2022, a lot has happened since then. So you have to include as much recent work as possible. Then just to round up, just a few checklists that you have to tick off if you're doing a literature review. When you finish, you have to look, have you fulfilled the purpose? Does your review actually identify the gaps you're trying to fill? Is it written at an appropriate level? You cannot carry a PhD level review for those in ND. It might be difficult for those reading in that area to understand. I'm talking about the students now, not the faculty particularly. Are the facts correct? You cannot include falsehoods in your review. The information needs to be relevant. The layout and the presentation is very important. You have to use a consistent font spacing and all that. You have to use a clear and concise language, and you have to sound academic. You cannot use your hostel language as the language you are using in academic writing. The abstract must summarize the entire review, of course, and the introduction must adequately introduce the topic. You need to organize the body logically, as we looked at earlier, and your conclusion needs to interpret, analyze, and evaluate any findings that were made in the literature review. Then any recommendation also you are making needs to be reasonable. You know, a lot of us, it's very easy to criticize and say this must be done, but you have to provide a reasonable argument. If a method is slow, you cannot just go to the recommendations and say the speed of the method needs to be improved. Look at what the authors have done. What have they done in order to increase the speed? You know, if they have used a particular method, then you can come and say, okay, another method can be explored. You can highlight the method or examples and say it can be explored to see that if it could improve the speed or something like that. Then, of course, the table of contents need to correspond with the pages. You have to acknowledge all sources of information. Referencing is very important in literature review. As a matter of fact, the literature review section is the section that has the most references. So you have to make sure you have to cite and reference any source that you get. You cannot take anybody's work and say it's your own. Then you have to check the spelling, grammar, and punctuation, and you also have to proofread. And if you go through all of this, I believe that you would have a literature review that is world-class, that is up to standard, and that would be considered for publications in journals and conferences, and even in your academic degrees. Thank you very much. I'll be stopping here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, sir, for the...
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful presentation. It was interesting and educative. Please, if you have any question, you can signify by raising our hands or typing in the chat box. Thank you very much. Mr. Said Oladipo, you can start with your question. Okay, Mr. Fidelix Okechukwu, you can proceed. Mr. Dada Razak.
All right, good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much
the
for this
speedy and
wonderful.
wonderful presentation. My question is regarding the progress report. You said that we need a literature review for progress report because I've been a project engineer for more than 5 years, and writing the progress report, I've never conducted a literature review. Because progress report is simply the project you have done, how far you have gone. So how does literature review come into progress report? Please, can you explain that so that we can be better going forward? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your insight. So I will give an example with the academic scene. For instance, if you're doing a master's or PhD, most times you see you would have, let's say, 3 to 4 objectives. And maybe your program would require you to provide a progress report on, let's say, each of the objectives. They might break it down into 3 progress reports to fit in line with your objectives. Now, you have a literature review from your proposal in the overall context of the problem you're trying to solve. However, if your first objective, let's say, is to design a model based on machine learning, it's also important that you do a literature within that area of machine learning to see the techniques people used, let's say the data they collected, the methods of performance evaluation, so that in the progress report, in addition to providing a broad scope of your review, you can say, okay, this review was done in relation to the first objective, and these were the things I identified and I'm doing to make sure that, okay, I don't run into the same problems that other people ran into, or how my own would improve in that area. And also there are instances where you would want to publish even from the results of your first objective. So in that kind of instance, you would still need to do the literature review. So that's what I meant by saying in progress reports.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For those asking for the material we shared, Mr. Fidelix Okechukwu, you can proceed with your question.
All right, thank you very much for this wonderful seminar. Really appreciate. The question I want to ask is, for those under postgraduates doing their masters, like how many literature reviews are they expected to review for their work? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I don't know if Prof. Aibinu would provide clarity if he's available later on, but from my own understanding, it's more or less subjective in the sense that it's based on your institution, it's based on your supervisor. From my own experience, when I was doing my own master's, I did my master's in the UK, and my supervisor recommended a literature review of about 50 papers. That was when I was doing my master's. Now that I'm doing my PhD, it was recommended at least 50 papers for one objective. So it's actually subjective depending on your supervisor, depending on your institution. Some institutions don't really have a fixed number. There isn't really a fixed number like a rule of thumb. But when you go online, you could see a lot of recommendations. So it's more or less what you agree on with your supervisory team, more or less. But for masters, I think you should be looking at between 40 to 60 references at least.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I may quickly add to that, for PhD, normally it should be minimum, not maximum, minimum of 50 index papers for one objective. That's my own rule of thumb, that at least to show us that you are really trying to do something, you need to review nothing less than 50 papers for one objective. So if you have 4 objectives, then we are talking about 200 papers. That's to show the breadth of the work. For undergraduate, those who have supervised know that for undergraduate we are a bit flexible and not actually demanding so much. I normally ask them to review 50 papers for undergraduate projects. So that at least it will show that they have really done something tangible. Thank you.
Mrs. Adegburi Kafayat, you can proceed with your question, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It has been an eye-opener for majority of us, most especially for me being a PhD student. I want to start from where Professor Aibinu actually stopped. I always have an idea that most often literature review, the number of literature that will be reviewed should be dependent on the available work that has been done in the field of study. For example, as a public health student, we always carry out interventional study. Most often when you have an interventional study that only few work has been done in that line, you agree with me that it becomes an Herculean task for you to be able to have an elaborate literature review in that line. So I really want a clarity, because so that we'll not be shooting ourselves in the leg. If a particular study you are conducting does not have an elaborate work that has been done in that line, most especially when it has to do with interventional study, so that most of us will not be thinking, oh, is the rule of thumb that as a PhD student you should be able to review up to 200 literature before you can have a pass mark. That's number one. Secondly, when the presenter was talking the other time, I begin to imagine we have different type of literature review. Can you please explain to us the general type of literature review as compared with systematic literature review? Because I think I'm beginning to see more of systematic literature review, which most often is not going to be in tandem with when we say we have undergraduate work, and most especially at master's level. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Well, let me start with the first one. Regarding minimal work in that area, well, I'm not into the life sciences, I'm more into engineering. And there are a lot of instances where you would see some of us researchers or students have faced similar challenges, especially if what you are introducing is quite novel. It's very difficult for you to find literature review in that particular area. So one thing that can help, especially if you are given the limitation of, okay, you need to have a particular number of literature before you can proceed, let's say in your program, is you can break it down. If you look at the one of my slides in the organization, you can break down the review into, let's say, different aspects. Like I said, I'm talking from an engineering standpoint. For instance, if you are developing a system that is not available currently, that, okay, in your, as to the best of your knowledge, the system is new, of course, if it's not available, then you won't find literature in that area. But what you could do is, okay, you can break it down into the techniques you are adopting or the parts of what you are looking at and say, okay, in this particular area, if I'm using, let's say, deep learning, these are the deep learning methods that were used in a similar area, and this was what was found. Then when you come to the area of, let's say, navigation, you can say, okay, in the navigation area, these were the similar methods that were adopted. So in that kind of situation, it helps give you a broader understanding of which of the methods you can adopt or modify and use in your overall sense. I don't know if that also applies to life sciences. Like I said, it's not my area, but that's what mostly we do in engineering and IT. Then regarding the literature review, the systematic literature review, it's more applicable for systematic reviews in postgraduate research works, and especially when you want to publish, because most of the reviewers and the supervisors or the, let's say, evaluation team would want to see an in-depth analysis of the things you've done. You'll see in most systematic reviews, in addition to describing, they critically evaluate. And also when critically evaluating, they compare with each other. And even after comparing, when they look at another literature and find a limitation, they would link it back to a previous literature and say, okay, it's in line with what they did in so work. So mostly in the postgraduate research work, that's where the systematic review is more applicable. It's not mostly implemented in undergraduate and let's say diploma levels because they are just introducing them into the research world. But for postgraduate research, I think more of the systematic review is expected from you. Thank you. I don't know if Prof would want to add anything to the explanation.
Thanks, engineer. Let me add that number one is that the 200, as I said, is my home view. So it is not a standard rule issue. And then again, as you asked, we should not be bothered so much about the quantity, rather about the quality. That's another thing. So please don't let us measure noise by saying it must always be 200. No, I shared my own experience that normally for a very good PhD work, as I've said, the minimum I normally accept is maybe 200, but standardly 500 is what I expect from my PhD student. 500 review papers. That's number one. But it's not about the number, it's about the quality of what you have reviewed and in-depth analysis of it. Now, back to your question that you may search and it may not be available. Totally yes. But in order to solve that, what I will recommend, or my recommendations are, number one, search different databases. Don't just limit yourself to maybe your field and less. We have a lot of databases and less, or index journals and less. Search more. Number two, the speaker has also mentioned that break it down. Look at your keywords and then use that one to break it down. I'm sure nothing is really new. That is why it is called review, and that is why it is called research. That is, go back and search again. Review. Go and look at what others have done in that area. Let us be sincere. We may have a lot of things that are really new. That's why we normally differentiate between invention and innovation. Mostly at PhD level, innovation is still acceptable and is very, very good. And then invention also. But invention at times is very, very rare. So To me, break it down, number one. Number two, search different databases. Number three, always remember that whatever you are doing may be invention rather than innovation. Even innovation, you have to look at what others have done and what exactly you are bringing in to make it an innovative idea. Bottom line, even in any field, once you adopt these approaches that I've mentioned, I can assure you that you will get nothing less than 200 papers. But lastly, don't let us be fixated about the number as we have cautioned. Let us think more about the quality of the research so that we will not experience what the speaker mentioned, that you just paraphrase and the rest, and then it will lead to bad literature review. Organize your work, break it down, look at it from the issue of correlation and causation and the rest, and you are going to get that quality review. Thank you. Okay, so those who have been asking for the materials, the lecture material will be made available to us within the next 1 hour, and then the video will also be made available to us in the next 2 hours. That's the first thing. And then we have also put on the platform that there will be discussion, and then there will be to experience sharing and the rest. So we have about four URLs there you can pick, because we want this to be experiential learning type. Experiential learning type. So we expect you to join any of these projects. We have about 4 projects here. Project A has to do with machine vision-based plant disease identification system. And then project B is about pipeline leakage prediction technique. And then project C is about accident prediction and prevention system. And then project D is about intruder detection using facial recognition approach. We expect you to join any of these Google Meet platform in the next few hours, discuss it, and let's see what you are going to come up with. And also, don't forget that this event, you will be listening to another lecture from Engineer Adedigba tomorrow, and then it will be continuation of this. We have planned this event to be for 5 days. Let's understand what literature review is all about. Let's avoid literature annotation. That's the aim. And please join us again tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. will be for the lecture, and then 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. will be for the tutorial, experience sharing, and maybe group work. Thank you. So if you still have people with questions, you can ask. Over to you, Raima, please.
Mr. Tajuddin Yekin, you can proceed with your question. Mrs. Adebori Kapayat.
Yes, I quickly want to ask, the project that was posted on the message part, is it basically for engineering students or is generally acceptable to everyone?
Generally acceptable to, we expect that after listening to this lecture, let's do a bit of hands-on experiential learning. Let's do a bit of hands-on, because until you experience it, until you get your hand dirty, sometimes just listening to the lecture might not suffice. Thank you.
Mrs. Latifat Bello Abufata, you can proceed with your question, ma.
Thank you very much for the insightful idea and insightful lectures presented so far. But please, what I want to ask, will the URL link be dropped here, or where can we get the URL to join the classes? Thank you.
If you check the message box right now, you will see those URLs there. So again, we have about 4 projects. We want people to share ideas, to talk. It's about open knowledge. It's about open communication. It's about the experiential learning. We don't want a case that you just come, listen, and no, still have interaction. Thank you. Is it possible? Okay, there is a question here. Is it possible to have a practical demonstration of how to carry out literature review? Yes. As I've said, when you go to, okay, just hold on, please. Just hold on. Let me quickly share my screen. So day 1, which is what we are on day 1. What you have just listened to has to do with basic introduction to literature review. What, why, where, and how of literature review. So tomorrow now, we are going to be listening to another lecture titled Types of Literature Review and Samples of Review Paper. So Engineer Adedigba will be talking to us about where to search for good papers for review. On day 3, we are going to introduce you to the use of literature review template. That is on Wednesday. And then there will be experience sharing also on how to fill that template. While on day 4, we are going to introduce you to converting the field literature review template into prose form. That will be on Thursday. While on Friday, which will be day 5, you are going to be learning about publishing a review paper. Regarding the URL that you have asked for, this is what I'm showing right now on the screen. So, but I've dropped those URLs there, and you can join any of those groups in the next. So the tutorial session will be starting by 10:20. So we have 8 minutes to actually stretch our leg or get yourself another cup of tea so that you can, okay, we have someone, our sheikh in the house, Ismail Olojede. Please, you can proceed, and that will be the last question for today. So, Malam Ismail Olojede.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Prof, for the knowledge sharing. I think your last explanation has actually satisfied my request.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thanks so much.
So, yeah, thanks a lot for that, and also thanks a lot for joining this discussion. We appreciate, and also let me use this opportunity to say our appreciation. So please, we value your time, and please, we appreciate everybody. I don't want to start mentioning names. Like we have over 100 of us on this platform right now, and then we have nothing less than 20 of us in this hall also listening to this talk. So when you had 100 plus with 20, let's even be minimal or economical. Let's say we have 120. And then to Engineer Jibril Bala, we are very grateful for that experience sharing. He is presently with the department